Hey, what up, guys? So, video number 2 this morning. I'm gonna hit you guys with the top most anticipated fights of the year, 2018. Now, what this one was is the fights that we look forward to the most this past year, going into the fight. Doesn't matter how the fight ended up. It's just the fights that we wanted to see the most as boxing fans. If one was close, though, we went with fights, even if worldwide you guys didn't. I went with, if it was close between a couple fights, but I went with the fight that I wanted to see more, even if it wasn't kind of worldly known. But there really wasn't that much of them. I got a pretty good idea and of the pulse of kind of deal, the casual fans and the hardcore boxing fans and what they want to see, so that's how I did mine. So we're going to start with the non-finalists, go division by division with that, and break those down. We'll start at 122, which is super bantamweight, and the most anticipated fight of the year it was hard to choose one. There wasn't a huge one, but I'd probably say Isaac Dogboe versus Emmanuel Navarrete in December. The reason I gave it to this one is because Dogboe had really kind of attracted a lot of people with his impressive Fight of the Year candidate knockout over Jesse Magdaleno back in April. And then in August on ESPN, he fought on a doubleheader and destroyed some legitimate Japanese contender in one round. He just wiped them out. So he got put on the undercard of Vasily Lomachenko. The kid's only got a lot of other big fights in this division all year. ESPN, decided Top Rank, and ESPN decided to put it on the undercard of Lomachenko, which is a big deal because Lomachenko draws in a lot of viewers. So, this was the biggest one. Emmanuel Navarrete, not really known coming into the fight, but he was an undefeated mandatory #1 contender. So, it was a pretty big fight in terms of, being the top contender and stuff. So I gave it to this one. 126, the most anticipated fight was, I think it was the Leo Santa Cruz Abner Mares rematch that took place in June. This fight got set way in advance. It was set pretty much in December or January of 2017-18, right there. The fight was already set and good to go, and these two guys had plenty of time to prepare and a lot of build-up for it. And, the first fight was entertaining between them. And coming into this one, I really felt that Mares had a better shot of winning this fight than he did the first fight, because the first fight he hadn't really done much in between his knockout loss to Johnny Gonzalez and getting in the ring with Santa Cruz. But the first fight the first half of the fight was a war. They went back and forth, and then the second half of the fight, Santa Cruz used his size and his height and his reach and took over the fight. So heading into this one, I had Santa Cruz as the #1 fighter in the division, and Abner Mares was my 5th best fighter in the division. So it was a pretty big matchup right here, and I'd say because it was a rematch, I give it to this one as the featherweight most anticipated fight at featherweight 126. Now the most anticipated fight at 130, which is super featherweight, I gave that to Miguel Berchelt versus Mickey Roman. I just talked about that in my biggest wins of the year, and I've talked about it a couple times already. This was a big fight. It was really the only matchup of the year where 2 top 5 guys were going at it. You had Berchelt was #1 heading in, and Mickey Roman was my 4th best fighter heading into this fight. It was a mandatory title fight. And, Roman in 2017 lost to Takashi Miura by a 12th round knockout, but that was a really good back and forth brawl. And then he went toe-to-toe with Orlando Salido and stopped him in December. And that was a fight that Berchelt was actually supposed to be in, and he had to pull out with an injury. So, Berchelt hadn't fought anybody legitimate since he beat Miura, and he was going in the favorite. But, there was people that thought an upset could happen. And, at first, it really looked like it could. Not really going to discuss what happened in the fight, but, it ended up being a good fight, and a lot of people were looking forward to it. It was in November on ESPN. So, next up, we're going to look at the most anticipated fight of the year at 140 pounds, which was junior welterweight. And this one, not a lot of big fights took place this year at 140. to where it was fighters that you really knew that much. You know, the Super Series was popping off. We had some good matchups, but not a lot of big names. So for me, the biggest fight of the year was early in the year in March. It was Sergey Lipinets against Mikey Garcia. And the reason I chose this one was because Mikey had beaten Adrian Broner at 140 in 2017, and he decided to stay at 140 for one more fight to go for a championship in a fourth different weight class. Lipinets was an undefeated, fighter at the time, hadn't really done much, but he was undefeated and he was younger, I think he's a little younger than Mikey, but it was just, the size matter and the fact that he was a top 10 guy going in against Mikey, who was questionable power at 140, going in. So, but to see Mikey, a name of his caliber, go after a championship in a fourth weight class was a pretty big deal. So, so I picked this one. I thought it was a good choice. Next up now for the most anticipated fight of the year at we're jumping up to super middleweight, which is 168, and we're gonna look at the most anticipated fight was Callum Smith for WBA, and it was the World Boxing Super Series finals here. It's kind of hard to pick any other fight over this one because it really was a matchup of the number one fighter in the world against, at the time I had Callum Smith number 10, but in the super middleweight tournament, this World Boxing Super Series tournament, these guys were the top two seeds. And Callum Smith was the younger undefeated fighter. Groves had lost before, but was the veteran world champion. And it was just a really good, strong matchup to determine the best at 168 and to win this tournament. And there really wasn't another fight that had the same implications as this one did. So this was my choice. Pretty big deal fight right here. Now, the most anticipated fight at 175, which is light heavyweight. This was tough to choose because there wasn't a lot of, like Kovalev and Alvarez. Not a lot of people knew Alvarez coming in. And even like Stevenson when he fought Vocek, not a lot of people knew Vocek later in the year, even though those ended up being maybe the more entertaining or we had more definitive endings to those fights. So I really had to choose the Adonis Stevenson and Badu Jack fight because people knew both of them coming in, and you really didn't know what kind of fight this was going to be. Jack was the underdog coming in, yes, but he always steps up and fights hard against whoever he's in the ring with, and he dominated veteran former champ Nathan Cleverly in August of last year on the Mayweather-McGregor undercard, and pretty impressively scored a 5th round TKO in that one. And then Stevenson hadn't really fought anybody with a name or that was a top level fighter in a long time. So it was a big deal fight going in. A lot of people were looking forward to it, and it ended up being a pretty good fight too. So that helped. But that's the best from 175. Now we'll go into our finalists now. I believe I did. Let me see how many I had for this one. For most anticipated fight, I had a 3-way tie for 5th. And, is that right? Yeah, I did. I'm sorry. 3-way tie for 5th. So, tied for 5th, the first one is Erislandy Lara against Jarrett Hurd. We've talked about this one. About the result and the win and all that stuff, who won. But going in, this was a big-ass fight. I mean, these guys were the top 2 guys in the division. Lara hadn't been in with a top-level fighter because nobody wants to fight him since he fought Canelo in 2014. So, he really, by default, stayed number 1 in that division and the world champion pretty much that whole time. And nobody wanted to fight him. And Jarrett Hurd came off the best 2017 for super welterweight. He was a fighter of the year that year in that division. And he was going to unify titles. He was not afraid. He took Erislandy head on in a unification bout, and in a great fight, they went at it. And but going in, it really was the number 1, number 2 fighter in the division going at it. And you don't see that a lot. And then you definitely don't see unification bouts as much as you'd like to. So this really set the bar for the best fighting the best, and it was just such a privilege to be able to watch that happen and that fight, and it ended up being a great fight too. And if you missed it, go back and watch it. It was in April on Showtime. Really strong fight. Tying that for fifth was Jorge Linares against Vasily Lomachenko for the lightweight title, 135. This one, again, this is another fight we've been talking about over and over, but Lomachenko was moving up from 130 to 135, and he's highly considered to be the pound-for-pound best fighter in boxing. So going in, against Linares, a 3-division world champion, and at the time was a number 1 fighter at 135. Him, 1A, 1B with him and Mikey Garcia. So, it was really hard to argue that, and it was a big-time matchup going in, and actually it ended up being a lot better fight than people expected. Lomachenko was going for a world title in his 3rd different weight class, trying to become the quickest guy to do that in terms of how many fights he had fought in. So, yeah, that was a big deal fight right there, and it ended up being a very good fight, and I was really happy to have, to see that matchup as well. And go back and watch it. It ended up being a great one. That was in May on ESPN. And a side note, got to hand it to Linares for wanting to fight the best, because Oscar De La Hoya was trying to get him to fight Lomachenko on HBO, and Linares ended up, I don't know if he took less money, but he said, nah, fuck that. I'll go to his network, because him and Bob Arum couldn't agree, and Bob Arum wasn't going to budge with the pound-for-pound best fighter in boxing. He wasn't going to budge and let that guy fight on another network. So, Linares told Oscar, no, I'll fight him on ESPN. It's fine. And he went over and did that, and that was a big deal to me. That meant a lot, So, big-time fight right here. Now, also time for fifth was Deontay Wilder versus Luis Ortiz for the heavyweight title. Another fight we've been talking about, ended up being a great fight. But going in, 2 undefeated heavyweights for the heavyweight championship. I mean, this was, at the time, I think this was number 2 versus number 3 for me, or number 2 versus number 4. I mean, you don't get those kind of fights a lot. 2 top 5 guys going at it, and for the world title, and just, like I said, Wilder, you were going in, you knew he had wicked power, but you didn't know what he was made of, once he got tested. And Luis Ortiz was, I've been saying it, he's still the boogeyman in the division that nobody wants to fight. So, going in, he was that, and hadn't really been tested either, and these 2 guys were going to test against each other, and somebody's O's got to go. You don't see that a lot anymore either in a high-level fight like this. So, big deal, and I was pretty impressed with the fight itself. So go back and watch that. That was March on Showtime. The 4th most anticipated fight of the year. Now, some people aren't going to agree with this, but it really was Alexander Usyk versus Murat Gassiev for the undisputed cruiserweight title back in what was it? That took place in July, and it was in the finals of the World Boxing Super Series. Now, I picked this one, even though in America, at the time, nobody really was giving this, not a lot of people were giving this fight a lot of love outside of hardcore boxing fans. But worldwide, this was a big-ass fight. And, both guys were undefeated, unified champions. They both had 2 belts each, and they were trying to unify all 4 belts in the finals of a tournament to determine the best fighter in the world. So, I mean, everything added up perfectly. When Terrence Crawford did it last year, when he became undisputed champ, nobody really knew Ndongo. He had beaten a couple veteran fighters, but, it wasn't like he was burning the house down. So, but this fight, these 2 guys were the top 2 guys. It was number 1 versus number 2, both undefeated, both champions, to determine the best. And, like I said, in the finals of a first ever Muhammad Ali trophy winning tournament, I mean, it was huge ramifications, huge fight. And if you missed it, it didn't end up being much of a fight. It ended up being a one-sided kind of beatdown. But you go watch Usyk and see why he is so good. That fight took place in July. It wasn't on an American network, but you could probably catch it on something. The number 2 most anticipated fight of the year, or actually, no, that was number 4. I'm sorry. Number 3, I gave it to Danny Garcia against Sean Porter for the vacant WBC title. I mean, this is another fight I've been talking about over the videos, but going into the fight, this was 2 top 5 welterweights going at it. a fight that people have been wanting to see, and the fight that only happened because Thurman ended up giving up his title. You know, and that was the only way Danny would fight Shawn Porter, because it was for the world title. He didn't want to fight him in a contenders bout in 2017. He avoided it. And so going in, you know, Danny was the more known fighter, but you really didn't know who was going to win this one. And I thought it ended up being a really good fight. That was in September on Showtime. So check it out if you missed it. But just great fight for the vacant world title in the #1 division in boxing right now. So just ended up being fantastic, and you should go see it. The #2 fight of the year in terms of most anticipated, that goes to Deontay Wilder versus Tyson Fury. You know, I talked about this during the controversial fights of the year, but other than that, I haven't really talked about it. But man, I mean, this was just a huge heavyweight fight. Tyson Fury had kind of retired a couple years ago, vacated all his belts due to drug issues and mental issues. And, you know, so going into this one, it was kind of, he was the undefeated but big time underdog against the power punching Wilder, who had scored his career best win and when he beat Luis Ortiz earlier in the year. And I couldn't wait to see this one. It was on Showtime pay-per-view, and I couldn't wait to see it. Shout out to the Mendoza brothers. Went and saw it with my boy Freddie and my boy Henry. And, yeah, it was just a big-time heavyweight showdown. It ended up being a very dramatic, emotional fight back and forth. But, yeah, going in, it was just, you know, another 2 undefeateds, but you had a former unified world champion against who talks a lot of shit, against an undefeated world champion coming off his best win who talks a lot of shit. So just a big-time matchup, and I was really looking forward to it. But the most anticipated fight of the year, without question, it was Triple G versus Canelo 2. I mean, how can you argue this one? The first fight was the biggest fight in boxing, had controversial ending. The second fight, you know, going in was even bigger because, you know, you wanted to see if Triple G really was the better guy, since most people felt that he won the first fight. You know, and you had Canelo, the biggest name in boxing. And so, you know, just a big-time matchup, a rematch. Both guys were, this time they had no respect for each other going in. And, you know, everybody wanted to see who was going to be the better man. So, yeah, absolutely. And if they fight again this year, that's going to be the biggest fight this year. I think, to me, that I'll look forward to a third fight with them even more over than Mayweather-Pacquiao if that fight happens. So, just got to wait and see, but that was a big-ass fight. So, hope you enjoyed this one too, guys. That's it. I'm going to come back with the overall fight of the year. Yeah, fight of the year, and then we just got fighter of the year. I'll definitely get fight of the year knocked out this morning, and then hopefully I can finish up with fighter of the year tomorrow and start my divisions, breaking down my divisions. All right, guys, have a good one. All right, bye.